I am the living bread that came down from heaven. If anyone eats of this bread, he will live forever. And the bread that I will give for the life of the world is my flesh. You might see the words bread and flesh and think John 6 is about the Lord's Supper. But no, it is not. Jesus said he was the bread of life, not because he was teaching people about some ritual that people must do to be saved. No, he was using bread as a parable to show that the people's expectations of the Messiah were wrong. He was teaching that the Messiah did not come to fill their bellies and destroy their national enemies. He was teaching that he is God, the Messiah, but he did not come to conquer, but to suffer and die for the people so that his believers can have eternal life. To know why, let's look at the context. So, before Jesus' teachings about the bread of life, there were two very important events that led up to it. The first event was Jesus feeding the 5,000 people in the middle of nowhere, and the second was Jesus walking on water. These two events are significant because these two events reveal that Jesus is God, the one who led the Israelites out of Egypt and saved them. First, the feeding of the 5,000 is parallel to God providing for the Israelites in the wilderness with manna and quail. Second, Jesus walking on water parallels the parting of the Red Sea because it demonstrates Jesus' authority over creation. However, in Mark 6 verses 51 to 52, which is the same event as John 6:16 to 21, we can see that the disciples couldn't see that Jesus is God. Their hearts were not open yet. And Mark 6:51 to 52 ties the feeding of the 5,000 and calming of the waters together by pointing to their hardened hearts. It was their hardened hearts that made them unable to understand who Jesus really is. So, why were their hearts hardened? It is because they desired something else than what Jesus wanted to give them. And the question would become, what did the people desire from Jesus? Take a look at John 6, verses 14 to 15. It says, "When the people saw the signs that he had done, they said, 'This is indeed the prophet who is to come into the world.' Perceiving then that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, Jesus withdrew again to the mountain by himself." And take a look at verses 30 to 31. So they said to him, "Then what sign do you do, that we may see and believe you? What work do you perform? Our fathers ate the manna in the wilderness. As it is written, he gave them bread from heaven to eat." From these passages, it becomes clear that the people were hoping for a Messiah or a prophet like Moses that would keep their bellies full and liberate the Jews from Roman oppression. And I will focus on people's fixation on food first. The people became so fixated on food and having their physical needs taken care of that they kept missing what Jesus was saying. Look at the interaction between Jesus and them. When the people found Jesus, Jesus called them out for being fixated on physical sustenance. He told them to stop working to fill their physical needs and instead seek after the spiritual food that gives eternal life. But they were still stuck on physical food because even after Jesus told them that believing in Jesus is the work that God rewards with eternal life, the people still asked for food by saying that Moses fed the Israelites. After which, Jesus corrected their misplaced trust in Moses and physical food. He told them that it wasn't Moses that fed them, but God. And he told them that their reliance should be on him instead of physical food, for he will give them spiritual food that will give them eternal life. But the people still misunderstood it as physical food and asked Jesus to continue to give them the food from heaven without realizing that it wasn't literal food Jesus was talking about. And here comes the main part of the video. Notice how the conversation was on sustenance and bread this whole time. And that is why Jesus used the bread parable when he said, "I am the bread of life." He was making a theological claim using the topic at hand, which was bread or sustenance. This was not Jesus talking about the Lord's Supper. If the people kept asking for something else, like rice or cake or spaghetti or whatever, he would have said he is the rice of life or cake of life or spaghetti or whatever. Jesus very frequently used objects around his immediate proximity to turn into symbols and parables to make theological points. And since the people were so fixated on bread, he was telling the people to stop thinking about bread and to replace that wanting for bread with Jesus, the actual sustenance they should be looking to. Then, what about the whole eat my flesh and drink my blood part? That was actually to address the people's expectations of who the Messiah was to be and what he was to do. The people, including the disciples, believed that the Messiah was going to come and liberate the Jews from their oppressors. They were hoping for the conquering Messiah. That is why they were about to take Jesus and force him to be king. And that is also the reason why they wanted a sign that was like the miracles that they falsely credited to Moses. Remember, Moses was the prophet that was involved in the Exodus, the liberation of Israelites from Egyptian oppression, and he was one of the most prominent figures in Jewish history. They were expecting another figure to bring them deliverance filled with miracles, like the parting of the Red Sea. So, how did Jesus address their false expectations of the conquering Messiah? He did so by calling himself the bread from heaven, and that the bread was his flesh, which started a dispute among the people. And here is the thing: by saying that they must eat his flesh and drink his blood, Jesus was telling them that for them to have eternal life, he must sacrifice himself for them. Thus, Jesus was letting everyone know that the Messiah was not to be a conquering Messiah, but a suffering one who was to be sacrificed so that everyone can live. And an important thing to note is that separating the blood from flesh represents death. But of course, because they were so focused on food, they misunderstood Jesus and thought he was telling them to literally eat him. But what he meant by eating was that they must benefit from his death, not benefit from him staying with them. Then in verse 62, he told everyone that he will not stay with them to fulfill their desires of conquering the world. And in verse 66, it says that many of his disciples no longer followed Jesus. This shows that their heart was not set for eternal life, but they just wanted their bellies full and enemies destroyed. And since Jesus was telling them that that was not going to happen, they were disappointed and stopped following him. And like I mentioned before, even the disciples had it wrong too. They did believe that Jesus could give them life, but they were still looking forward to the conquering Messiah, not a suffering one. Matthew 16:21-23 says, "From that time Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders and chief priests and scribes, and be killed, and on the third day be raised." And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, saying, "Far be it from you, Lord. This shall never happen to you." But he turned and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan. You're a hindrance to me, for you are not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of man." Jesus' reaction to Peter reveals Peter's inner thoughts. Peter was putting his own desires above the Father's will. And a very important thing is, Jesus called Peter Satan because Peter was tempting Jesus with the same temptation that Satan was trying to tempt him with in the wilderness. It is in Matthew 4:8-10. Again, the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. And he said to him, "All these I will give you if you will fall down and worship me." Then Jesus said to him, "Begone, Satan, for it is written, you shall worship the Lord your God, and him only shall you serve." Here, Satan was tempting Jesus to abandon whatever his father's plans was. Remember, Satan didn't know what the plan was, but Satan was telling Jesus to just take over the world by force. And by telling Jesus not to go to the cross, which was the Father's plan, and instead stay and conquer the world, Peter was being the same as Satan. And here's the thing. John chapter 6 shows us the sad reality of the unreadiness and the hardened state of humanity. Out of his love for the world, God, the creator and the ruler of the universe, came down to the world in the lowest possible position, a sacrifice, to suffer and die to give people eternal life. However, the people rejected the Messiah because they desired temporary things over what God wanted to give them. In conclusion, John 6 and the bread of life is not about the Eucharist. Jesus was not teaching people of a future ritual that people must perform to be saved. He was telling his followers that he is the provider of eternal life, and the only way that people can get eternal life is by him dying for them. John 6's theme is about how people are too stuck in their own ways and care about their immediate needs that they fail to seek the real necessity that can only be found in Jesus Christ. And by making John 6 to be about the Eucharist, people are missing the theological truth that Jesus was trying to teach, that he came to die for the world and that God knows best. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and hit that like button. Bye-bye.